He searched for food in the deadly cold, while his mother was dying in a cave. But in the snow, he found a door he shouldn't have opened. Look what was hidden under the mountain. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are watching from. The first snow had come earlier than any season the mountains remembered. It fell not as a soft blanket, but as a crushing weight, piling on the pines until their branches bent like old backs beneath years of work. It smothered the forest floor in a silent white sheet that never softened, never melted, never gave way to the gentler rhythms of the woods. The cold was not simply cold. It was a presence, a living thing that crept into every hollow and cave, making even the stones feel brittle. Wind curled between the trees in long, hollow sighs, carrying with it the taste of a winter far harsher than the creatures of the forest were meant to endure. Deep within that expanse of white, where human boots had not touched earth for decades, a cavern lay hidden behind a curtain of icicles. This cavern, dark and deep, had been home to a mother and her young for as long as the little one could remember, which, in truth, was not very long at all. The Bigfoot child was no larger than a human 8-year-old, though far stronger, his fur still soft with youth, his limbs slightly clumsy with growing bones. He had not yet learned the full language of the forest, nor the ancient signals carried by scent and vibration, but he understood enough to know that something was wrong. His mother lay curled in the darkest corner of the cave, her massive frame rising and falling in uneven shudders. She had once been a tower of strength, her steps shaking loose dust from the cavern walls, her voice a deep, rumbling call that could cross valleys. Now she could barely lift her head. Every breath scraped from her chest like stone dragged over ice. Her fur, usually thick and brushed by the forest winds, had lost its luster. Small patches near her neck and ribs had thinned, revealing dark skin beneath. Her eyes, once bright and alert, seemed clouded by a distant, unreachable fog. The child pressed close to her, nuzzling into her side in a way that had always earned him a soft, reassuring rumble. Today there was only a faint shift of her hand, barely brushing his shoulder. He made a soft, churring sound, the sound he made whenever he wanted her attention or comfort, but she did not respond. Her breath rattled again, drawing painfully in and out, and he felt an instinctive jolt of fear race through him. Something in the rhythm of her breathing was wrong. It did not sound like sleep. It sounded like surrender. He touched her cheek gently, and she managed to lift her eyes to him. In that look was a message older than their species, a message of warning and love intertwined. Go. She lifted her hand weakly and nudged him toward the cavern entrance. Even in her weakened state, she used the old gesture, the teaching gesture. One flick of the fingers that meant search, another that meant return, and a final trembling sweep of her hand that meant danger. He understood. Food was scarce. The cold was deepening. If he stayed, she would grow weaker. If he left, the world outside could consume him. But instinct and devotion clashed, and in him, devotion always won. He pressed his forehead briefly to hers, a soft rumble vibrating in his throat, promising silently that he would come back. When he stepped outside, the cold bit at his face with teeth sharper than any predator he had ever encountered. Snow rose nearly to his chest, forcing him to wade slowly through drifts as deep as rivers. Wind cut sideways across the mountainsides, lifting clouds of powder and hurling them into the air. The world felt too big, too empty, as though the winter had swallowed every living thing. No scents lingered, no birds called. Even the distant cracking of trees had stopped, as if the forest itself feared to make a sound. He moved methodically, smelling the air, turning his head, searching for any sign of life. He padded toward a thicket where rabbits often hid, but the ground was undisturbed. Deeper into the woods, he found a fox's den, but it had been abandoned, snow sealing the entrance like a tomb. Even the old bear cave, he remembered, its earthy scent, always strong in the summer, was nothing but frozen stone and silence. As the day dimmed into the purple glow of dusk, the cold sank deeper into his bones. He shivered, instinct urging him to return home before the dark brought even worse dangers. But as he turned, something beneath his feet changed. A faint vibration pulsed upward through the snow, as though the earth had shifted under him. He froze, head tilted, ears twitching. The vibration came again, slow, heavy, unnatural. It sounded like something massive moving far underground. His heart thumped. Curiosity warred with fear until curiosity won. He trudged toward the source of the vibration, his breath fogging the air in thick, trembling clouds. With every step, the tremor grew clearer. Not a creature. Not the earth. Something mechanical. The snow grew shallower near a steep rock wall, where the wind had carved swirls and exposed flecks of stone. The trembling became a hollow hum, and beneath the sound, he could hear faint mechanical clicks, tiny cracks of metal shifting against metal. He had never heard anything like it, yet it pulled him closer. His instincts whispered danger, but something deeper whispered hope, because warmth. Real warmth began to drift from the stone. He brushed snow aside, expecting rough rock. Instead, his claws scraped something smooth. He pushed harder, clearing more snow until he uncovered a perfectly straight seam. That alone was wrong. Nothing in nature made lines so straight. His breath hitched as he scraped more snow away, revealing a square of metal embedded directly into the mountainside. A door. He stepped back, unsure whether this was the same kind of human-made object his mother had always warned him to avoid. Humans meant danger. Humans meant traps. But he was freezing. She was dying. And the warmth leaking from the seam told him that whatever was behind that door might mean life. He reached out with trembling fingers. The metal was cold, but not as cold as the surrounding air. As his palm pressed against it, a deep vibration rolled through the door and into his arm. He startled and jerked back, falling into the snow. The vibration stopped. The forest fell silent. He approached again. He touched the door a second time. This time the vibration pulsed once, steady and strong, like a heartbeat awakening. Then the metal began to shift. A low, heavy grinding noise echoed through the clearing, and the door slid slowly inward. Warm air blasted out, carrying with it a strange scent. Dust, oil, and something almost sweet, like plants that had been sealed away for years. He stepped inside. Warm light spilled along the floor in squares, coming from lamps recessed in the ceiling. The hallway stretched long and metallic, its walls painted a dull gray, flaking with age. The floor hummed faintly beneath his feet. He looked back once, the snowfall swirling at the threshold like a ghost waving him goodbye. Then the door closed behind him. He heard it lock with a heavy click. But there was no time for fear. The warmth embraced him completely. His limbs tingled as blood rushed back into them. He moved farther down the hallway, guided by a faint rhythmic clicking deep inside the structure. He passed doors with faded labels he could not read, though his eyes followed the symbols carefully. He did not understand words, but he recognized patterns. The symbols repeated often near the floor panels, warnings of some kind, though he could not know it. Turning a corner, he found a small room filled with metal shelves. Objects lay scattered, thick blankets folded tightly in plastic, boxes heavy with unknown tools, and soft packages with red marks resembling berries or flowers. The symbols on them matched those on a small white box near the center of the room. He picked it up, sniffed it, and shook it experimentally. Something clattered inside, medicine, though he had never known the word. He gathered as much as he could carry. A blanket slung awkwardly over his shoulder, a package clutched in one hand, a white box of rattling items in the other. His breath came quick, fueled by urgency. His mother needed warmth. She needed food. Maybe he did not know the meaning of healing, but he knew she needed something more than he could give. A sudden flicker drew his eyes upward. Along the far wall, a panel lit up. Faint lines of green light formed shapes, and for a moment, a message flickered on the dim screen. System active. Protocol Revelation 02. He took a step back. The lights overhead brightened, humming louder. Somewhere deep within the structure, mechanisms whirred to life. Dust fell from vents as fans turned for the first time in decades. Something alive, something powerful, stirred behind the walls. He clutched the supplies and ran. The warmth that had felt comforting now felt like a warning. The door he entered through began to slide open just as he reached it, and he burst through into the biting cold with a gasp. The wind slapped him hard, but he welcomed it. He stumbled through the snow, struggling with each step as the forest dimmed into night. Behind him, the door sealed shut, the hum echoing faintly through the mountains. Far above the forest, a distant tower deep in government land blinked alive with a light that had not glowed in nearly half a century. A silent alarm traveled through wires long thought dead, reaching a facility where monitors flickered awake. Men and women, startled awake by screens lighting the walls, stared at the signal with disbelief. Revelation 2, the long-dormant project. Something had entered the mountain site. Something living. The little Bigfoot did not know any of this. He knew only the pressing need to reach his mother before the cold drained what little strength she had left. Snow swirled around him in great waves as he hurried through the dark forest. His footsteps left a shaky trail behind him, a thin line of hope cutting through the frozen wilderness, leading back to the cavern, where warmth and light human strangers were already beginning their journey toward him. He did not look back. If he had, he might have seen the faint red glow rising in the distance, the glow of machines awakening. He might have heard the faint whir of rotors from far-off hangars where aircraft were being prepared. He might have sensed the ripple of tension passing through the forest animals, those few who still survived. But he saw none of it. He saw only the path ahead, lit dimly by the moon behind thick clouds. He felt only the warmth of the supplies pressed to his chest. He knew only that he had found something impossible, something humans had left behind long ago, something dangerous. And perhaps, somewhere in the back of his instinct-driven mind, he sensed that the opening of that door had changed everything, not just for him and his mother, but for the entire mountain. The cold pressed harder, winds screamed louder, and the mountains braced themselves for what was coming next. When he finally reached the cavern, the last traces of warmth from the hallway still clinging to him, he hurried inside, clutching the blankets and medicine. His mother lifted her eyes at the sound of his steps. She saw the strange objects in his trembling hands. And for a fleeting, fragile moment, her breathing eased, touched by hope she had not felt in days. Outside, unseen in the falling snow, distant lights moved across the sky, and the mountains listened. By the time the little one returned to the cavern, night had fully claimed the mountains, turning every shadow into a frozen wall and every rustle of wind into a whisper of warning. He slipped inside as quickly as his tired legs would allow, clutching the blankets and boxes he had dragged through the forest. The dim glow of reflected snowlight filtered weakly into the entrance, just enough to illuminate the shape of his mother lying where he had left her. Her breathing was shallow, each inhale a struggle, each exhale a fading echo. But when she heard his approaching steps, her head shifted ever so slightly, and her eyes found him in the darkness. He hurried to her side, and placed the blankets near her chest, tugging at them until they unfolded clumsily over her. To him, they were strange objects, too smooth, too thin, unlike any fur or moss he had ever used for warmth. Yet the moment they touched her, she lifted her head an inch, as if surprised by the unfamiliar but welcome heat they held. He made a soft rumble of pride and relief, a childish sound, but full of hope. She touched his cheek briefly, her hand trembling, and he pressed his forehead to her palm. But the moment of calm lasted only a breath. A faint echo of distant thunder rolled across the mountains. Not thunder, something heavier, more deliberate. The mother lifted her head, sniffing the air with sudden urgency. Something in the world beyond the cavern had changed. Her eyes sharpened with instinct, even through the haze of sickness. She tried to stand, pushing with her forearms, but her strength failed, and she collapsed back onto the cold stone. The child felt the tremor in the ground a moment later. It was subtle, but unmistakable. A pulsing throb as though great wings beat somewhere far above the treetops. He looked toward the entrance and saw the snow outside shifting in waves, stirred by something distant, yet powerful. He glanced at his mother. She understood something he did not. Something about the scent now drifting in through the cavern mouth. Humans, machines, old enemies, old dangers, old memories she had never wanted to pass down to her child. Her hand pressed weakly to his shoulder. The gesture was a plea, a warning, and a command all at once. Stay safe. He leaned into her palm for a heartbeat, then reluctantly rose. He needed more than blankets to help her. More warmth, more food. Something to stop the sickness eating away at her strength. The strange white box he had brought rattled with unfamiliar objects. He touched it, then touched her hand again, as if asking silently whether these could help. She lowered her head, unable to answer, her breath rattling again like wind through brittle reeds. He had no choice. He had to return to the warm metal place inside the mountain, no matter what dangers might now lie near it. He stepped out into the cold once more. The wind howled and dragged snow in twisting spirals around him. The distant thrumming had grown louder, rhythmic, almost mechanical. The child did not understand machines, but he knew danger. Still, he moved forward through the snow, driven by a fierce determination stronger than the fear gnawing at him. The journey back to the hidden door felt longer this time. Shadows seemed to move between the trees. The scent of smoke drifted across the forest, faint, foreign. Once he stumbled into a trail of footprints, large and heavy, forming a path through the snow. They were unlike any he had seen. Human boots. Fresh. Several of them. His heart hammered against his ribs. His mother had always taught him that humans brought only danger. Stories passed in their silent culture told of traps, of violence, of curious creatures taken and never returned. Humans feared what they didn't understand. And yet, he had seen their blankets, their food, their strange medicines. Those things hadn't harmed him. The warmth in the metal room had saved him from freezing. Confusion tangled with fear until he didn't know what to believe. He followed the boot prints from a safe distance, keeping to the trees. The prints led directly toward the doorway hidden in the mountain. Soon he heard faint voices, soft, human, muffled by the wind. They were moving cautiously, shining beams of light through the forest. He crouched behind a fallen tree and watched as they approached. 4 figures emerged from the dark. 2 carried equipment, 1 held a long object he did not recognize, and the 4th, smaller than the others, moved with careful steps, watching the ground intently. Their breaths puffed into the air as pale clouds. When the little one accidentally shifted snow under his foot, the smallest figure turned, sweeping a beam of light across the trees. He held his breath, staying perfectly still until the beam passed. The humans continued toward the metal door. When it came into view, its lights dimly glowing, one of them muttered something in a sharp whisper. Another knelt beside the frame, brushing the surface with gloved fingers. They seemed both alarmed and amazed. Judging by their gestures, they had expected this place to stay sealed forever. The smallest figure, a woman, paused suddenly. She knelt in the snow and touched a set of tracks. His tracks. The child felt a shiver crawl down his spine. She brushed away snow carefully, as if studying something precious. She leaned close and murmured something to the others. Her tone was not afraid. It was gentle. Wondering. She stood, looked into the dark forest, and for a moment her gaze passed directly over the place where the child hid. Though she could not see him, he felt exposed, as if her calm, searching eyes could sense him anyway. She said something soft to the others, and they began preparing to enter the metal room, their lights reflecting off the door as it slid open. The child swallowed hard. He could not wait for them to go inside, not if he wanted to find more warmth, more supplies, more hope for his mother. He crept closer, staying low to the ground, moving through the drifting snow like a shadow. The wind swallowed the sound of his steps. By the time he reached the doorway, the humans were already deeper inside, their voices echoing faintly down the corridor. He hesitated only a moment before slipping in behind them, keeping to the darker corners where the lights could not reach. Inside, the warmth wrapped around him once more, but the comfort was fleeting. The air vibrated with a distant mechanical thrum. A slow awakening, the heartbeat of an ancient machine roused from decades of sleep. A low alarm tone chimed far deeper within the structure, steady and cold. The humans heard it too. Their heads turned, their movements quickened. They whispered urgently. The child moved past an open doorway and froze. A shape stirred in the far shadows of the room beyond, a large shape made of metal and angles, its joints glowing faintly red as life returned to them. A rectangular head turned with a grinding sound. A pair of glowing red lenses blinked into focus. It had no scent of fur or flesh, no warmth of life, no emotion. It was a guardian built of cold purpose. The robot scanned the hall. It detected movement, not the child, not the humans specifically. Anything living. A roar of metallic gears burst from its core, and it lunged forward. The child scrambled back, heart pounding, fur bristling. The humans shouted and broke into a run, scattering through the hallway. Lights flickered overhead as the robot advanced, crushing old crates beneath its feet with deafening clangs. Sparks flew from its joints as its sensors swept the corridor in sharp, red arcs. The woman from earlier darted into a side room, shouting to the others. The child followed without meaning to, drawn by instinct. The robot slammed into the wall behind them, sending a tremor through the building. Metal groaned, and dust rained from the ceiling. One of the men pointed to a panel near the far wall, a control box with wires tangled behind it. The woman rushed toward it, pulling tools from her belt. The child watched, trembling. He didn't understand the human words, but he recognized the urgency, the desperate struggle. The robot's heavy steps echoed closer. Its claws struck the doorway, leaving deep dents. One more strike, and it would break through. The child moved suddenly. Without thinking, he ran toward the opposite side of the room and let out a sharp, piercing shriek, the kind he used in the forest to startle predators or summon his mother. The sound cut through the air and echoed down the metal hallways, drawing the robot's attention instantly. It turned toward him, red sensors narrowing, its steps redirected. It moved toward the sound. The humans shouted in alarm, but the child held his ground until the last possible instant. Then he dove behind a metal crate as the robot charged past him, slamming into the wall and sending another wave of metal shards flying. Behind him, the woman cried out as the panel sparked violently. She twisted wires together, slammed a switch, and a split second later, the entire facility plunged into near darkness. The lights flickered once, twice, then dimmed to faint emergency glows. The robot froze mid-step. The red lights in its eyes dimmed, then died completely. Its massive body sagged, collapsing onto the floor with a reverberating crash. Silence flooded the hallway, breathless, trembling. The child slowly peeked from behind the crate. The woman sat slumped against the wall, exhaling in relief. When her eyes landed on him, she didn't scream. She didn't reach for a weapon. She simply watched him, her expression soft with wonder and something else, recognition, perhaps, of fear meeting fear. He stayed still, body quivering from exertion and terror. She raised her hand, palm open, moving slowly so as not to frighten him. Her voice came out gentle, low, soothing tones meant to calm, not to command. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the intent. Then she reached into her coat and took out a small, glowing package, the same kind he had taken earlier. She slid it gently across the floor toward him. It bumped softly against his foot. He blinked down at it, then up at her. There was no threat in her face, only a quiet encouragement. Tentatively, he picked up the package. He held it to his chest, his breath unsteady but hopeful. The woman touched her own chest, then pointed outward toward the forest. He followed her gesture, then looked back at her with confusion. She repeated the motion, slower, more deliberate. She wanted him to show her where he was taking the supplies. She wanted to help. He hesitated, torn between fear of humans and the memory of his mother lying weak and fading. Then, with a trembling exhale, he turned and began moving toward the exit, glancing back to see if she followed. She did, slowly, carefully, leaving her tools behind. Outside, the wind roared. Snow whipped against them, but the woman only pulled her hood tighter and kept following the small figure, who moved with determined steps through the night. The trek back to the cavern was long, more treacherous now that darkness had fully consumed the forest. But the child pushed forward, pausing only to make sure the woman remained behind him. She stumbled a few times, sinking into deeper drifts, but she always rose again. At last, the entrance to the cavern appeared, a dark mouth beneath a curtain of icicles. The child hurried inside, and the woman followed, and froze when she saw the massive shape curled in the shadows. The mother, though weak, lifted her head when the strangers entered. Her eyes burned with primal warning. Her enormous hand flexed, claws scraping the stone. She made a low, rumbling growl, a sound that shook the cavern floor. The woman raised both hands and remained perfectly still. The child moved between them, placing his small hand on his mother's cheek. He chirred softly, nudging her, coaxing her to listen. He pressed the glowing package into her hand and gestured toward the woman. The mother's growl faded, replaced by a confused, exhausted sigh. She slumped back down, unable to hold her head up. The woman stepped forward, inch by inch, watching the mother carefully. When she reached her, she knelt and opened the medical supplies. The mother flinched, but did not attack. The child remained close to her, touching her arm, guiding her attention away from fear. The woman cleaned the wounds, applied medicine, and covered the mother with more blankets. Her hands shook, not from cold, but from awe. She was touching a creature the world insisted did not exist. But even awe could not last forever. A faint, distant rumble rolled across the mountains again. This time, unmistakable. The blades of helicopters slicing through the night air. Searchlights flickered faintly over distant treetops. The woman froze. Her breath caught. She looked toward the cave entrance, then back at the child and his dying mother. The military was coming. She knew what would happen if they found the pair here. She stood abruptly and gestured frantically to the child. He stared at her, confused, until she pointed toward the deeper woods, away from the cave, making sweeping motions, the universal sign for run. He stared at her for a long moment. She repeated the motion, fear and urgency written plainly on her face. He understood. He moved to his mother, nudging her gently, helping her rise. Her legs trembled beneath her massive weight. The woman placed a hand on the child's shoulder, urging them both to go. The mother swayed, struggling, but began to move, leaning heavily against the cave wall. The woman stepped back into the entrance, blocking it with her silhouette. She glanced once more at the pair she had just saved. Then she turned toward the approaching lights, determination hardening her features. "Go," she whispered, though they did not know the word. "Run!" The last thing the child saw as he vanished into the snowy darkness with his mother was the woman standing firm, facing the storm of human machines descending on the mountain, a silent guardian between worlds that had never meant to meet. And as the forest swallowed them, the first blinding beams of searchlights burst across the snow. If you want more stories like this, make sure you subscribe. Check out the next videos on the channel and share this one with someone who needs it.